go straight through to Chip Berlet's presentation, but I wanted to tell you, because Matthew was talking about LaRouche publications, that Erica and Hugo have brought along this archival material, which is very valuable, so we don't want to leave it lying on the tables, but if anyone wants to have a look, then it will be here over lunchtime. And I just wanted to say also from Matthew's presentation, when he was sort of talking about the coded racism of the LaRouche movement, I wanted to remind you about Jeremiah, that Jeremiah was a peace activist. He got drawn in because of his universal values, because he was opposed to war, and Jeremiah represented the best of our young people, which makes our discussions about the perversion of LaRouche even more important today. So very much looking forward to hearing Chip's presentation.
You haven't even heard me yet. So my background is as an investigative journalist, but I started writing peer review articles in sociology, which is like removing my intestines through my nose with a needle. But it's been very helpful. I've had very nice people who would say, you really do, you read this other book. But I've been actually writing about the overall concept of how do you take otherwise normal people and convince them that some other is evil, but beyond that, they're so evil that you need to expunge them in some way, whether that's by removal or murder or genocide. And it turns out it's an alarmingly simple process, and it gets repeated over and over again, and it's well studied. And so I want to start by challenging the idea that genocides are unknowable. They're extremely knowable. People know how they're set up, how they're carried out. It requires a mass media and a mechanized bureaucracy. But otherwise, it's actually very simple. And it starts with something that Matthew mentioned, which is the master frame and then the core narrative. And so a master frame in sociology is just this sort of idea of what needs to happen and who's the good people and who's the bad people. And that generates narratives, which are stories. That's all they are, stories. And these are stories told within the movement. And this can be a large political movement, it can be a small social movement, it can be a national social movement, it can be a small group, and it can be a group that I would call a totalist group, or what is generally called a cult. And within this cult, totalist group, or any other movement, there are stories about what a member should do, how they should act, why they're good, why the other is bad. And even in very socially beneficial movements, there is this idea that there's something that needs to be changed and we're good for wanting to change it. What becomes very unacceptable in democratic civil society is when you decide the other is not just has the wrong policy, but they're intrinsically bad. In and of themselves, they're bad. And that sets the stage for a whole cascading series of things that occur. Now, I'm going to argue that the way that you convince people through this process is to start by suggesting that someone is subverting the ideal society. There is an ideal society, we know what it is, we either have it or we want it. And then there's these bad people who are preventing us from achieving it or are subverting it now so that we will lose it. And this is a threat. And it turns out that it's very easy to mobilize people with a threat narrative, a story that things are about to change, we're about to be targeted, the economy is going to collapse, the International Monetary Fund. There's a million reasons why this threat is real. Now, it's so much easier then to talk about this threat in terms of an evil conspiracy. So the combination of the core narrative of good versus bad, good versus evil, the idea that there are people subverting either what we want or what we have, and then it's a conspiracy, and the people who are behind the conspiracy need to be exposed because they are the other, they are the ringleaders of what is happening to the ideal us, the ideal nation, the ideal religion, the ideal whatever, and that the other is threatening us. And of course, us, we're always the real people, the real citizens, the natural nativist people, a funny term because it doesn't mean what it sounds like. It means the people who belong here. You know, we may have stolen it from people, we may have murdered people by the tens of millions, doesn't matter. We're now the native people of this land, and this land, or this city, or this movement, or this religion is sacred. And there we start to get into a concept that is widely misunderstood called political religion, which means that in terms of politics, you approach your political activism as if it's a sacred duty. And this sacred duty is often tied to this idea of an apocalyptic. Now, this is where I usually lose people and people start doing this. Oh, what's coming? So, all the word apocalypse means, it comes from very old language roots, which means, you're going to love this, same words as revelation and prophecy. So what it means is that the apocalypse reveals hidden truths. So the revelation, the prophecy, reveals hidden truths in the course of a confrontation between good and evil, after which the world is transformed in a substantial way. It's not just in Christianity. The idea of an apocalypse is rooted in many social movements. In fact, you could argue, as I do and I get criticized by sociologists, that in fact all social movement organizers have to be at least a tiny bit apocalyptic, otherwise why would people get out of bed in the morning and go stand on a corner with a sign? So the idea that time is running out, we need to do something, is very common in all organizing. The problem is when you take those first things I talk about and say that the organizing is because there is a subversive conspiracy of evil people who are intrinsically evil. Because this sets up the next question. If, in fact, this evil other is evil and they're conspiring to subvert us, maybe, and we know that they lie and they don't love their children and they're not like us and they're really succulent and probably, you know, have whatever. So there are all these explanations of why these people are disgusting. And we have images of these people, and they're almost always the same images. They're lice, they're vermin, they're rats, they're snakes, they're the octopus, you know, over the everything. So, and that's not just aimed at Jews, because it's a fairly common rhetorical form to describe your enemy as someone who infects you in some way or poisons you in some way. So that, as I said, this is dreadfully ordinary how this all works. Well, if all this is true, and now here's a fun fact. In 1828, the Thomases, Mr. and Mrs., came up with a core maxim of sociology, which sounds complicated but has a very easy resolution. Situations that are defined as real are real in their consequences. Which means if you're part of a movement that says that Obama, we elected Obama to stop the war and build equality, and he's not doing it, so we should then maybe not vote this time because there's no point. So that people who believe that may not vote, okay? Or people who believe that the local imam is teaching Muslims to blow up child care centers next door to where we live. If you believe that, you might go out and beat up a Muslim, or something you perceive to be a Muslim, like a Sikh, which has nothing to do with Islam. But after 9/11, there were Sikhs being beaten up because people said, oh, well, they look different, and they look swarthy, and they have funny headgear, let's go beat them up. So I've actually met with Sikh leaders saying, you know, it's not that we're saying, you know, it's just, it's an absurdity of racism that, and religious bigotry, that people don't know the difference between, you know, somebody wearing a turban and long story. Anyway, you get the point, is that it's not the reality that matters, it's the perception. If you perceive someone to be the enemy, whether you perceive them because they look quote-unquote Jewish or they look quote-unquote Muslim, you will act on that belief, and under stress you may act with aggression and hurt people or kill them. And that this is in fact predictable if you start out from the beginning that says this other is evil and out to get us. So the apocalyptic aspect, and for those who love films, there's this marvelous movie, High Noon, which is the ultimate apocalyptic movie because there's actually a clock every 10 minutes in the movie, counting down to the time when the evil people arrive on the train. And what will the ordinary people do? Almost every Western in American film is apocalyptic. Moby Dick is apocalyptic. Apocalypse is just confrontation, coming, good, evil struggle, things change, and we now know that you should put your harpoon on your shoulder and head west until people ask what it is. So, okay, then what else? Well, then why wait for the attack? If we know they are out to get us and they're evil, and that this is all dreadful, then just kill them, get them, expel them, genocide. It's perfectly justifiable because they were going to do it to you and you get to act first. Now, how do the LaRouche people do this? Well, it all starts then by portraying your enemy as part of a conspiracy that is subversive and evil. And it's very difficult for people to understand how completely compelling this is when you're totally peppered with it constantly within the LaRouche organization. British puppets prepare Armageddon. This is Jimmy Carter, I know from the tweet side. Yeah. Anyway, but basically, this is a classic example of the idea that there are manipulators up above, yes? And the manipulators up above control the actions of these major political figures. So there's a conspiracy, it's hidden. Up above are the evil people. And so you're actually building a dynamic understanding that what you see in the real world is actually being controlled by something hidden and evil. And actually preparing Armageddon. Armageddon is an apocalyptic term. Armageddon is it's a valley outside of a mountain, Megiddo in Israel, where according to the book of Revelation, written, I might add, by no one who should have been put in the Bible. Most Bible scholars now say the book of Revelation was written by this hermit, not one of the followers of Jesus, who lived in a cave that probably had psychedelic mushrooms growing in it. And he wrote things. And now we're stuck with it. In Catholicism, in the book of Revelation, it says right at the beginning, interesting metaphor, consider, don't read this literally. But of course, in the United States, where you sent all your dissident religious people, thank you. There are so many millions who believe that, in fact, the United States is the New Jerusalem and Armageddon and yada, yada, yada. And so they're constantly looking for the signs of the times. There are huge numbers of people in the United States who believe the apocalypse is at hand. I've interviewed many of them. My favorite statistic is that in New Jersey, a public polling group once asked voters whether or not they thought Obama was the Antichrist, the agent of Satan in the end times. And approximately more than 12% said they thought it was possible. And another roughly 12% were sure of it. So 20% of voting Republicans in New Jersey thought Obama was the Antichrist. Thanks again for sending the dissidents. Defeat Britain's terror war against the USA. And in this case, was Oklahoma was an act of international terrorism, led by whom? By British, you nasty people. You blew up the Oklahoma Federal Building in a plot. You can imagine then that the people that are targeted by LaRouche are seen as evil. But let's get down to the nitty gritty. I have 5 minutes left. Yes. Oh, that's yeah. How Brzezinski is linked to the Jones cult. It doesn't matter what, but it's just there was a cult, people died, Brzezinski, whatever. It's totally below me. Up at the top here is the Tavistock Institute. Because, yes, I know. The Tavistock Institute is, in fact, where, and I speak in the words of Lyndon and their followers, the Tavistock Institute is a British intelligence agency plot to train assassins to go after LaRouche and kill him through mind control and brainwashing. no circular thing going on there, is there? No. So Tavistock, now, the Tavistock Institute has been at the heart of LaRouche's conspiracy theory since about 1974 for the witness statement, which the coroner threw out, that I prepared. It shows that somewhere between 2001 and 2007, there were scores of mentions of the perfidy of the Tavistock Institute in LaRouche publications. The leader of LaRouche counterintelligence, Jeffrey Steinberg, claims to have exposed a secret covert Tavistock agent and interviewed him in the paper. So they take this very seriously.
Yeah, I wouldn't be able to come after the next session.
Much better. So that a young Jewish man stands up at an international meeting where the ultimate leader, Lyndon LaRouche, is speaking, and has noticed that there's this kind of connection that's troubling, and says, but wait, I'm a Jew and I recognize anti-Semitism when I hear it. He's already a target. He's a target of suspicion. He's pushing back at these ideas. He's struggling with this new information, which he either has to accept what he's learned in the outside world, or that there are these puppet masters. And it appears that the puppet masters are Jewish, and he's heard this before, and he's saying, wait a minute, this is pretty transparent. And I think to him it was very transparent that it was anti-Semitism, because it is anti-Semitism. But I will pause here and say, this formula works no matter who the target is. It can be gay people, it can be Muslims, it can be Christians, it can be Jews, it can be anybody, it can be immigrants, it can be whoever the voice tells you that these people are evil and you have to act before it's too late. So that the dilemma here is that the LaRouche organization uses a kind of right-wing, uses a kind of populist rhetoric that is very attractive to young people. It sounds like it's left-wing, progressive. It's anti-war. It claims to want to build civilization. It sounds like it's a progressive, humanitarian, anti-war argument, and it attracts young people. But the entire ideology of the LaRouche network is a form, it's a peculiar, cracked form of fascism, in which ultimately the ideology is extreme right, hard right. And because his work is so full of these fanciful conspiracy theories, the press does not take seriously that he is in fact not crazy, that within the cult totalist organization, these theories are drummed into them and it's received knowledge and they believe it. And that as soon as Jeremiah added that he had been at Tavistock, I would presume they would think that he may have been trained as an assassin to assassinate LaRouche, and that there would have been some kind of altercation in which he would be defending himself against either psychological or physical attack. And I think that that is the question that needs to be answered by the German authorities. If he didn't commit suicide, and he said that he did not, and I don't believe he did, why was he running away from this group? He was running away from this group to save his sanity and his life. He was running away from this group because he was being squeezed in a vice. And he knew that if he did not get away from this group, he would either be harmed or inducted as a recruit. And he was running for his life, and he died, and the evidence is not clear that there was a traffic accident that resulted in his death, and yet he died. So why? So I leave it to you and the German government to answer the question posed essentially by the coroner, is that if an anti-Semitic cult exists with a headquarters in Germany, and a young Jewish man died after saying he heard anti-Semitism and was afraid that, is the memory of certain German officials so short about how the Nazi genocide began with Kristallnacht and pictures of Jews as rats? And when will the German authorities take up the cause of dealing with the fact that, as I wrote, as the person coordinated the new entry in the Encyclopedia Judaica #2, as we wrote in that entry, the Lyndon LaRouche Network is one of the world's largest purveyors of anti-Semitic propaganda. It has a headquarters in Wiesbaden, Germany, and the German authorities look the other way and turn their back on history. Thank you.